You know, the Grahams, like an institution in Washington, that was sort of just absolute shock to me.
This week on Inside Washington, the shocker. The Washington Post sold. Another victim of the changing media universe.
But I don't really subscribe to anything anymore. I read everything online.
President Obama cancels a summit with Putin.
There have been times where they slip back into Cold War thinking and a Cold War mentality.
A new terror threat triggers the closing of nearly 24 U.S. embassies.
This group is fairly ingenious, fairly bold, and eager to cause damage.
The president targets Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Also, Hillary the miniseries, Hillary the documentary, and Reince Priebus, the angry chairman.
I'm not going to expose our candidates to this kind of treatment.
Well, the name of the program is Inside Washington, and if there's a bigger story inside Washington this week than the sale of the Washington Post to the guy who started Amazon.com, I can't think of one. For the record, on this panel we have Colbert King, who writes a column for the Washington Post, Lois Romano, Washington Post veteran, Charles Krauthammer, part of the Washington Post Writers Group. I came to Washington many years ago to work for broadcast properties that at the time were owned by the Washington Post. Glenn Thrush reads the Washington Post. Former executive editor Len Downey, a 50-year veteran of the Post, was in the newsroom as publisher Catherine Weymouth, Katharine Graham's granddaughter, announced that Amazon founder Jeff Bezos was buying the paper for $250 million.
Catherine read a statement from him in which he made clear that he strongly subscribes to the journalistic values of the Washington Post. And that, for me, of course, is the most important thing.
Okay. Let's take off the pundit hats for a minute, and would you just give me, please, your personal reactions to this news? Lois, you wrote a fine piece in Politico about your memories of working at the Post.
My first reaction was shock. I was actually home working, and I got in the car and ran back to the office. So it was shock, then a little bit of sadness, and then sort of, well, maybe this is a good thing. You know, they've tried everything, and maybe the model needs to be blown up, and maybe Jeff Bezos will bring a fresh eye.
Colby, who would have thought that the Grahams would ever give up their beloved newspaper?
I was the last one who would have thought that, because this is the second time the Washington Post has rocked my world. The first time was in March of 1954 when I reported to duty to deliver my newspapers and learned that the Times Herald had been sold to the Post. So they hit me again this time. But this one was really a shock because of the presence this time of absentee ownership. The Grahams as such an institution went far beyond the newspaper. Their interest in the city was deeper than that.
Charles?
If you'd asked anybody who works for the Post or who lives in this town, what is the least likely event that will ever happen in your life, it would have been that the Grahams would sell the newspaper. But the best explanation for why it was done, it was one of the people who works at the Post said to me, Don Graham loved the paper so much that he wanted not to love it to death. And he knew the family could keep it going, but it couldn't thrive, and that's why they ended up doing it.
Glenn, what does this tell you about the future of newspapering?
Well, it's interesting. I have a unique perspective. I worked for Newsday, my hometown paper, for years, and it was passed around like a used El Camino from owner to owner. And so I've been down this road, unfortunately, quite a number of times. And what I can tell you in terms of the constellation of potential owners and their understanding of the marketplace and people's consumer habits, I think Bezos is about as good as you're going to get. But I can tell you again, from having dealt with a disparate group of owners, it's a total wild card. You never really know what's going to happen. Here's a line I love, and I'm quoting. I love the smell of newsprint in the morning, and my favorite time of day is 30 minutes to deadline. That's from Dave Kindred's book on the Post, Morning Miracle. And he tells a story about Bob Kaiser, then the managing editor, releasing a memo in which he says, and I'm quoting again, "We could sell an entire electronic Post for several times the newsstand price without once using an ounce of ink or a roll of newsprint, all gravy at the bottom line." And then later on, Kindred tells the story of Steve Call back in I guess it was 11 years later. They have a retreat down on the Eastern Shore, and he's got a proposal for the Post to put its arms around the internet
and nothing happens, call goes away. Kindred's line was that in 2003, WashingtonPost.com still came off as your grandpa's newspaper taped to the monitor screen. Now that's changed, Colby, right?
Yeah, it's changed, but the change took very long to get there. I have, and maybe you have it too, Gordon, in my place down in Annapolis, an upright, non-electric Royal typewriter. That was the means by which we conveyed information to the public. Today we have this thing which allows us to speak to people all around the globe, allows us to see pictures taken instantaneously from everywhere, and to read newsprint that's filed within seconds. This is the change. The newspapers are not obsolete, but they're going to have to change the way in which they deliver information to people. Tastes have changed. Some people don't read comics anymore. Your publication doesn't even produce comics. Politico.
Well, we have a Pulitzer Prize winning.
We have a Pulitzer Prize winning cartoonist.
And we get our comics from Fox News and MSNBC, I guess.
Okay, I'm remembering now the last edition of the Rocky Mountain News. I think it was in 2009. Goodbye, Colorado. Is that the future of the Post?
It's not the future of the Post as we see it today on the newsstand. The Post is going to be there, I suspect, from the kind of new owner it's going to have, but it's going to meet a different kind of market. The brand may be there, but the product it's going to sell is going to be much different.
I think they'll still be a little bit, they'll still have a newspaper. I think it's going to be very different, much smaller. I think what Bezos will do was is figure out, he has a plan, by the way, because he went away for 3 months and then came back to buy it. So he has a plan. I think he's going to try to figure out how to fully digitize it. One of the problems the Post has had for a long time is the demographic. They have not been able to get out of that older demographic. And that's what I think Bezos can bring in a very big way.
Go ahead.
Well, I think the other thing about it is the purchase comes at a time after the Post has already made some significant newsroom changes. I mean, they just invested God knows how much money in this new kind of online video project. They have sort of this new in-house TV station. We've seen some separations on the business side. There's been a ton of staff reductions. So to a certain extent, he's buying a paper that's already made some transformation.
Charles?
Look, on the question of whether we're going to have a paper in hand, the new owner has said that papers won't exist as papers in 20 years. But remember, this is a guy, Amazon, who sells things. He sells stuff. He's not selling air or electronics or dots on the screen. He sells stuff that arrives at your door. So he knows how to sell stuff, and he probably will try to sell the paper as a paper. But the one problem is this: I don't know anybody in my son's generation who reads and holds a newspaper or even a magazine. And that, I think, is simply a habit, generational, that I don't know how you can recreate. If that generation has never done it, they're not going to do it.
I'll underscore it. It's not just his generation. I was in a barbershop a couple of days ago, as you can see, and there was a TV on, but everybody there, all the customers, were reading not newspapers. They were working with their little smartphones.
Yeah, I don't read the. I get the Times delivered and I get the Post delivered. Mike, it's best. Strangely enough, it's like I give it to my kids and they take it to summer camp with them. I don't read it. I mean, I use my subscription to access the digital stuff.
All right. For the record, the publisher of the New York Times says they're not selling. However, the Times has sold the Boston Globe to the owner of the Boston Red Sox for $70 million. How'd you like to be a sports writer on Boston right now?
Aren't they paying players more than that?
Okay, we got to go. Threats that triggered shutdown of embassies across the Middle East and North Africa.
We are accomplishing what we set out to do. Because of you, Osama bin Laden is no more. Because of you, Al-Qaeda's top ranks have been hammered. The core of Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and Pakistan is on the way to defeat.
President Obama with the Camp Pendleton Marines this week. Well, Osama bin Laden is gone, but his number 2 man is still around, and so is his former personal assistant, the head of al-Qaeda's Yemen affiliate, whose plan to mount an attack on American targets led to the closing of 19 embassies. And now the State Department has ordered all non-essential staff to leave the U.S. consulate in Lahore, Pakistan, and issued a travel warning to Americans. Colby. So this game isn't over.
The game is not over, and it also raised the question about the information that led to this decision, and how did we get it? And it goes back to the larger question of metadata that's been gathered. Does this suggest that there is some value in what they've done, and that out of this activity that we've been reading about for the last 3 weeks, there is some fruit from it that allows them to take the action that they've taken? Because you're right, the threat has not gone away.
How about this? We don't want another Benghazi. How about that? Is that the message?
Well, it's clear that part of the motivation was because of Benghazi, the embarrassment, the fact that the story still won't go away and we don't have explanations as to why the warnings were ignored, etc. But I mean, it's a larger problem, and that is that Al-Qaeda has metastasized, and that under this administration, I mean, the one thing that's been overlooked in all the debate about the NSA and the signal intelligence is we're relying 100% on signal intelligence because we don't have any more human intelligence, because this administration, in a fit of righteousness, declared at the very beginning, when Obama was sworn in, they would abolish all that nasty stuff, those interrogations. And the reason that we kill everybody with a drone is because if you capture a terrorist, you got nowhere to put him, you got no way to interrogate him. So in the absence of that, we rely entirely on signal, and it leaves a lot of gaps.
But wait, one of the reasons the Benghazi thing happened was because it was essentially a CIA station, and apparently there was a glut of 41, 42, I've heard different numbers, of CIA operatives who were on the ground in Benghazi who were looking to get out of Dodge. What I think is really funny about this is, for all the talk of this sophisticated electronic dragnet with the NSA, the reason apparently we got this is because Al-Qaeda held a conference call.
Well,
please press mute.
Yeah.
But you have to be listening to get it, or collecting the information to get it.
I agree with you. I think a lot of it's being driven by, they don't need another Benghazi on their hands. And I also think the president's politically had to pull back a little bit. He said recently, we don't want to be perpetually at war. Well, we're going to be perpetually at war.
Charles mentioned NSA. Now, after Russia's Putin has granted asylum to Snowden, the NSA leaker, the president says, okay, we're not going to have a meeting one-on-one. What's your take on that?
Look, this is the collapse of the reset. Obama came into office announcing that relations with Russia were cold, had been allowed to drift under the Bush administration, implying it was our fault. So he was going to warm them up. He caved on missile defense in Eastern Europe. He thought he would get cooperation on Iraq, cooperation on Syria, cooperation on arms control, and he has been stymied and humiliated at every turn. This was the final straw. This was a gratuitous poke in the eye, and he finally had to at least show some gumption in canceling that. But he's still showing up in Russia for the G20 conference. He should have stayed home from that.
He had no choice. I mean, he couldn't go. And Snowden gave him the opening to do it. But what Charles says, there's so many bigger issues here. I mean, arming Syria, everything's just blowing up. And to go would have made him look very weak, to meet with Putin.
I mean, I agree with Charles. I think this has been kind of an awful episode. And why did it take the White House 2 to 3 weeks to make this decision? I mean, they could have done it days earlier, at least at the beginning of the week. It's just, to me, kind of hard to figure out.
The issues beyond Snowden, there are other issues that Charles mentioned, but I agree here. I don't know why he's setting foot on Russian soil. The G20 is not that significant an activity. It's only a few years old anyway.
I'm a little confused about the legal situation in Russia. Putin's been talking about opening up the gulags now. On the other hand, if you're a successful businessman, you could end up in a gulag. I don't quite understand how that works.
They put so many in the gulag, the economy is collapsing. So they're going to have to let some of them out to do what they were doing before and hope they won't do it as badly or as rapaciously as they did it before. But they got to do something because they've taken too many of the private sector into public jails.
Well, he's got a very interesting way of governing, at least when it comes to free enterprise, right? Well, whether it's free or not is another question.
You got to remember who Putin is. He was a KGB guy. He was in East Germany. He's not a warm and cuddly. He was not a community organizer. In the clip you showed, you've got Obama saying, sometimes Putin slips into Cold War mentality, and I try to remind him the Cold War is over. He doesn't understand that Putin's a Russian nationalist. He pines for the Cold War. Putin has said that the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest tragedy of the 20th century. Think about all the other stuff. Because he's a Russian nationalist. At the Cold War is when Russia was at its greatest since Peter the Great. He wants the empire that the Russians had back. He wants the colonies in the Third World. And Obama imagines that all of this is a nostalgia by a guy who doesn't understand that the real issues are childhood obesity and global warming.
Didn't President Obama's predecessor look into Putin's heart and see something glowing there?
He got it wrong. But at least he didn't have a country that was thwarting us at every turn. That's a big difference.
Glenn.
Yeah, no, I looked into Charles's soul and I saw exactly the same thing. But the notion that, like,
but you realize you got it wrong.
I realize I got it wrong. The notion that, like, parole as stimulus is to me a pretty.
We could try it.
Yeah, we tried. I think we tried it in Brooklyn once, but it didn't really work out.
The more we talk about this, the more it becomes very apparent that the administration made the right decision in canceling this meeting. These men have nothing to talk about.
Yeah, but how do you deal with a country led by a guy like that?
You can't.
Now, I know there's a lot of internal dissent. Now, how far that's going to
take? I don't think this is one of those things you can finesse. Russia is just too integral to the problems that we're facing in the world. North Korea, no help. Syria, obstruction. Iran, obstruction. On international trade, no help. No help on nuclear non-proliferation. We're going to have to face up to the fact that this is a real problem, and it's going to have to be a game on. Putin, I think Putin's take on Obama, and I'm just speculating, I think it's a very dangerous one. I think he's reading a weakness there that is allowing him to be very aggressive, and if Obama doesn't stand up and push back, the other countries will also take a message from this. It's very important, that the United States, on this question with Russia, demonstrate that it is the stronger power.
He's not only weak, he's naive. I can imagine, Putin, who is this guy? He's a lightweight. Remember, reset was a form of appeasement. It was a way of saying that the cold relations are our fault, when in fact it was a result of the Russian war on Georgia. And what Obama has done is to offer all kinds of goodies. I would say Bush might have misread.
Glenn.
But just one thing. He did not give away the missile defense in Eastern Europe, as Obama did, and that's appeasement. That's a big difference.
I think the key issue going forward that I've heard from the administration is keeping Russia and China from collaborating deeply to create more mischief to us. I think that's the relationship that they've got to watch.
America's so weak. Why shouldn't they collaborate, as they have, against American interests?
All right. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac on the way out. We'll see.
For too long, these companies were allowed to make huge profits buying mortgages, knowing that if their bets went bad, taxpayers would be left holding the bag.
Okay, the president this week proposed restructuring the federal government's involvement in home mortgages, phasing out Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Housing recovery is doing pretty well. Fannie and Freddie profitable. Let me see. As of next month, they'll have paid back about $146 billion of their government loans out of $187 billion. Why do we need these folks, Colby?
The president was really disingenuous with the statement there. But, like, these folks made all this money that they ran away, we didn't know what they were doing. We encouraged them to do it. They were pushed to do it. They pushed the money out the door to do it. Barney Frank, God bless him, they were the ones who pushed Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to do this.
They backed, what, 90% of new mortgages?
Yeah, that they shouldn't have. They were buying this stuff up and reinvesting it, and now we go, shame of it all? Give me a break.
What happens if they go away, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac?
They should.
Yeah, but what happens if they do?
Well, the problem is what's going to hold up the market. I guess they're going to have to phase out the government support. But it was always a trick, as Colby indicates. Here were entities that had the implicit guarantee of the government, never explicit. Of course, implicit enough that in the end, when they went to bust, every penny was reimbursed. there's no reason the government should be in the business. Canada actually doesn't even have a deduction for mortgages, and it didn't have a financial collapse. Government always had these wonderful goals, encouraging home ownership. It's a lovely thing, but it distorts the market and it sets us up for a bubble after bubble.
Talking about bubble after bubble, the statistic this week that chilled my blood was that Nevada housing prices, either northern Arizona or southern Nevada housing prices, are up by 35% over year to date. And we're just hopping from bubble to bubble. It's nuts. The other thing is the current HUD secretary, Sean Donovan, somebody I know from New York, I used to cover low-income housing, had in a previous life been an advocate for talking about rentals, dealing with either subsidizing or creating situations where rentals in cities were more affordable. That conversation is over, and this White House again seems to be reorienting to the same thing that Bill Clinton did, which is home ownership.
No, that's the contrary. I think in the speech that Obama gave, he's talking up rentals now. He was
no money behind it whatsoever. Section 8 voucher waiting list as long as they've ever
done. The idea is what they're going to do with that, with this. The Fannie Mae and Freddie paying the money back, is they're going to take some of that money and put it now into rental programs. That's what he said in the speech. I think that's a mistake. You ought to be. Home ownership still has some value, intrinsic value beyond just
almost everybody's goal, I believe.
All right,
Lois.
so we're all in hot agreement here that we should get rid of these two agencies, but this is going to be pretty hard to do. I mean, they back what, 80-90% of the mortgage market right now. 2018 is going to be a very lofty goal, and
it's not going to happen.
Right, and you have to get the Democrats and the Republicans to agree on alternative measures.
Hey, I want to change.
Sell them to Amazon.
Say again?
Sell them to Amazon.
Right. I read in the Washington Post the other morning that Senator Mitch McConnell's campaign manager told somebody in a phone call earlier this year he took the job holding his nose because he thought it would help Rand Paul in a 2016 presidential bid. Glenn, this is not helpful.
I would say you could just actually make the ads for the Democrats right now, which just involves a lot of fingers pinching noses, people in bib overalls in Kentucky.
That's what's wrong with NSA snooping.
I'm going to predict that he's the only campaign manager in the world that can say this, and he probably will not get fired.
Colby. No comment. Okay. Pete Rouse leaving the White House. Right. You're going to leave a big hole there.
Well, there's a lot of big holes in the White House. I mean, it's we've lost a ton of these major players. David Plouffe, David Axelrod. I mean, you walk up there around the Oval Office, you see the tumbleweeds rolling by. Pete Rouse is a big part of Obama's success. He was his first chief of staff in the Senate. The question is not when is Pete Rouse leaving. He's 67 years old, been in government for 4 decades. Is who's going to replace him?
Okay, good question. Why is the Republican chairman steaming?
If you move forward, we're done. We're done playing in the sandbox and going through this song and dance as if everything's hunky-dory. It's not.
Okay, here's what the Republican chairman is angry about. NBC is planning a 4-part mini-series about the life of Hillary Clinton starring Diane Lane. CNN, full-length documentary on Hillary Clinton. Priebus says if 2 networks do that, the RNC will host no primary debates, none. He argues that the mini-series and the documentaries are nothing more than campaign ads, and free ones at that, Glenn.
Well, what's interesting here is the Republican Party, what Priebus, Priebus likely will not be around for the party in 2016, right? But what he's doing and what a bunch of these other ancillary Republican groups are doing is they're doing everything they can to sort of degrade her image, to get in early so that you can, so it's okay to criticize Hillary Clinton again, who's arguably the most popular political figure in America.
Don't they really have a point? I mean, at this stage.
We just had this conversation about Bezos and the Washington Post. These lines are getting blurred. I know Chuck Todd had an objection to it, but I think this is not a serious criticism. I don't think that they will be turning down these. Maybe this is an idea that the Republicans have of cutting down the debates, which were a crazy number of
months. Not a serious threat, because I don't think they're going to tremble about an absence of debates. But it's a marker of a much more serious issue. The bias of the media is so obvious it's not worth even discussing. It's like the sun rising in the east, and I understand it. But this is jumping the shark. It's August, it's Shark Week. I mean, you're going to have networks in hagiography, 4 hours on a network, and expect that people are going to look at it and say, oh, this is just a historical document. Of course it's to pump her up. And it reflects the bubble that these people live in. Which it doesn't
I'm
even...
going to get out here on a limb.
I like Diane Lane. I like Diane Lane, and I
this.
would, if she were playing anybody, I'd like to watch it. But I remember when John Glenn, just before John Glenn entered the Democratic primary, they came up with the movie, The Right Stuff. And a Mondale operative said, it's all over for us. We're dead if that movie comes up, the way they're going to glamorize John Glenn. Well, what happened to John Glenn? Nothing.
Well, he went up in space again.
Yeah, but he couldn't get through the primaries. That's not going to change the political landscape, these two things.
I don't think this thing's going to get made. I mean, the documentary will probably, because documentaries are made on candidates all the time, so what? But I think there's a lot of pressure from the news side, and my guess is that they pull the plug on the miniseries.
And having been someone who was trapped in the Hillary vortex for 3 years, to my family's great detriment, I can tell you this is part of the phase where she gets built up, and then the next phase is tearing her down.
That'll be coming up, and you get the last word, Glenn. Thanks. See you next week.